Eye of the tiger. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Robertson, and I'm president of Park Avenue Armory. And I've just got to tell you, of all of you, to those of you who have been here during this really extraordinary day, it's just been an amazing experience. And the artists, many of whom are still in the room, I know Damien joins me to say what a wonderful group of artists and what fascinating things we learned about today and what wonderful conversations. So I thank all of you so much. And now, finally, to finish up, we're going to do Person, Place, and Thing, which is a specially televised event. And it's led by Randy Cohen, and it'll be an intergenerational conversation by Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sonia Sanchez. And we will have musical entertainment by the Ebony Hillbillies. So this is a very exciting evening, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Randy Cohen.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say a couple things. I think people are particularly interesting when they don't speak directly about themselves, but about something that is meaningful to them. And so that will be the structure for this evening. Sonia and Ta-Nehisi will talk about one person, one place, and one thing that they care about. They can love it, they can hate it, I don't care, as long as, you know, they feel for it. We are recording for broadcast. What else? There will be Q&A at the end. Oh, and because we're recording for broadcast, when you ask your questions, I'm afraid the no cursing rule is in effect. It's the FCC, my hands are tied. I don't mean to look at you in particular. It's just, you know, although they did warn me. What else? Oh, if you check your tickets, you'll find that when I say we'll be right back, which I will say from time to time, you're legally obliged to applaud like lunatics. I'm sick about it too. The good news is that you don't have to mean it. It can be that kind of sarcastic applause that means he's such a jerk. Because on the radio, when we edit it, it will sound like you really like me, and all I care about is appearances. So that's fine. What else? Oh, we always like to begin with music to kind of whip you into a frenzy of conversational receptivity. And I can think of no one better to do that than Enrique Prince, Bill Salter, Norris Benefit, 3 members of the Ebony Hillbillies. Here we go. This just happens to you two all the time now.
Yeah, we're taking this thing on the road, okay?
Yeah. So, who's your person?
I'll take that from you.
Oh, sure, you okay?
Thanks. See, I'm always a professor. You know, I come with books all the time.
All right, I've rushed us all into this head over heels. I think we have to get our books down. Excuse me. This is the kind of backstage stuff you don't get, just anywhere. So, Ta-Nehisi, who's your person?
Am I doing this? Am I
We're
sharing
both
the-
doing it.
Oh,
I
okay.
think we both share it. Right?
Okay.
Anyone can say
All
it.
right, okay. How about on 3?
Okay, on 3.
One,
1,
two,
2,
3.
3.
Amiri Baraka. I wasn't too well coordinated, but y'all got the idea.
I don't think in all of human history anyone has ever gone 1, 2, 3, Amiri Baraka.
Wow. I'm
Although I
telling
can
you.
hear kids on playgrounds doing that now.
Yeah, they better be doing it.
I have,
America should be doing it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that everyone in this room knows who that is, right? All right. So, why did you choose him?
Well, for me, I should start by saying that it is just like an incredible honor to be here with Sonia Sanchez. And I'm gonna try to not make this too long, because I can go on about this. But there's a part in Between the World and Me where I talk about, I guess like the decision or the feeling that, okay, writing was what I was gonna do. And it really was the poetry of Sonia Sanchez and of the Black Arts movement. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But, and Amiri Baraka and Larry Neal and that entire generation that, awakened me, and got me to the point where I felt like these were people who were writing out of something that I knew and something that I understood. And Baraka was just so ferocious. He would come down to the literary festivals. See, all this is related, so I'm blowing secrets. But he would come down like to the literary festivals at Howard. And I was like, this 18, 19-year-old kid, and he was so ferocious, and, you better not ask a stupid question because he was going to give it to you. I mean, he was like, he appeared as he did in his literature. And I just, I thought he was absolutely incredible. And I can't imagine myself being here. I definitely can't imagine Between the World and Me as a book, obviously without the greater African-American literary tradition, but certainly without the Black Arts movement, which Baraka, Larry Neal and Sonia Sanchez, just pioneered.
Mm-hmm.
Sonia, you worked with him, right?
Gosh, did I ever work with them?
Do you mean, is that a bad thing?
No, not at all. It was a great honor. I tell the story about the first time I'm an ex-stutterer. No one ever believes it when I say it, but I am the person who went by the time I got I out, the teacher had packed up her books, and 20 people in the class said, Sonia, whatever. But I was that, and they asked me, Larry called me and said, we're going to do a reading in Harlem, Sonia, and we don't expect too many people, so you should come out and read with us. It was Baraka, Larry. It's not working, huh?
Oh, it's working. I just need to adjust.
That's because I'm so tall.
Yes.
Right. And I said, I have never read my poetry out loud. He said, oh, Sonia, come on and do it. So I showed up, and it was just the three of us at this reading in Harlem.
What year was it?
I don't know. It was some, I want to say, I hate this. It was some dump someplace, It was like someplace in a basement. You went down 20, whatever, and you got to a place and you said, this is where we're reading. And Larry had organized it.
Wait, explain to everybody who Larry is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Larry Neal, who is the co-editor of Black Fire, the great book that they put out in 1968. And so I figured, okay, I'll watch one of them read. And all of a sudden, Larry said, okay, Sonia, you're on. And so I said, oh, I can't do that because I'm hearing stutters in my head. And he said, he brought me up, and I came on stage, and I said, I can't do it. And they opened the curtain, and there I was. And so I read the one poem that they allowed me to read, people. And then I got off, and I said to him, how was I? And he said, he was busy, organizing, whatever. I said, how? He said, well, look at you. You talk about you're afraid to be on. Look at you, you're bragging. You were fine. Because I still heard the stutters, whatever. And to this day, if those of you know who are ex-stutterers, so-called, there's no such thing as an ex-stutterer. You always hear the stutters at the base of your skull. It's just that you control them, But I read that poem, and he said, good, you can come out and do another reading with us. So it was a great privilege.
So you were on trial.
I don't know if I was, well, they didn't know. Could I say something when I first met Baraka?
Please.
I studied with a woman by the name of Louise Bogan. I had come out of Hunter College at 19 and a half. My father said, you're going to be a school teacher, whatever. And I decided to go and take some grad courses at NYU. And I wanted to take a writing class. Had tried to do writing classes in New York City, but I would walk into a classroom, and those night courses, right? And it was all males. And I was the only female, plus I was a black female. And I would say something and nobody responded. So after 2 sessions, I would leave. So I go into Bogan's class at NYU. 45 people are there. She said, does anyone have a poem to read? And so it's like asking some alcoholics if there's a bottle someplace in the house. And we all went in our pockets and purses, whatever, and I raised my hand real fast, and I said, I'd like to read, Ms. Bogan. And she said, I came up front. I read the poem, and hands went up, and people actually responded. It was in Louise Bogan's class that I published my first poem in a literary magazine, and I would bring bags of wine to that class at NYU for us to all drink. And this was this woman who taught us form, an amazing, amazing thing that happened. But we will leave there and do a workshop in the Village on Charles Street, and we used to go to these clubs, and one night we went in, and Baraka was sitting in the back, listening to music, writing reviews, and as I passed by with the group, he said, Sanchez, and I jumped. He said, send me some poetry. I'm editing a book out of France. And I said, okay, and kept going. And they said, isn't that great? I said, this man doesn't know me from beans, whatever. 2 weeks later, we come in, and he's still sitting there, hat sitting acey-deucey, smoking a French cigarette, drinking a Boilermaker, and he says, Sanchez, I guess you don't want to be in the anthology. And I turned and said, well, are you serious? He said, what do you think? And I left there, got in my Volkswagen, went up the West Side Highway in 2 minutes to my apartment on Riverside Drive, sat down and typed up the poems, came back out that night at 2 o'clock and dropped it in the mailbox down at the post office. That was basically one of the first things I had done with a bunch of poets who became renowned black arts poets, was the anthology that he was, called Revolution, coming out of France. Yeah.
That kind of early encouragement for a writer is huge, right?
It is, my brother.
Did you get that, Ta-Nehisi?
My path was a little different. Yeah, I did. So my dad, and Sonia, they know each other, and which is to say, like, I was kind of bathed in it as a child. So yes, I did have it, but it was kind of like all around me. You know what I mean? I think that's like the difference generationally, and this is, why I think I know why I wanted to talk about Baraka and Black Fire tonight was it's the significance of not having to invent things, of it already being there. And so like
Wait, explain that.
Well, I guess I didn't really need like that kind of encouragement because as I was saying, I was bathed in it.
Yes, you was.
They had already done it. You know what I mean? Like it was a copy of Black Fire in my house. It was already official. It was established. These people were writers, and they were writers who wrote in a way that was different than say, Fitzgerald. Even though I love Fitzgerald too, I'm just saying it was a different thing. That's not a slight at,
I love Fitzgerald.
Yeah,
That's,
I mean,
that's me.
Well, I do. I actually do. That's not a slight at all. But I'm saying there were people who wrote in a different way.
But when did someone did someone tell you in particular that your writing was worthy of publication? the way Sonia had it, from like someone whose opinion was worth respect.
Yeah, but that did happen. I probably, but unlike Sonia, I probably shouldn't have let them publish it because it was a terrible poem. Awful. It was my freshman year
But
at
that's the
Howard
beginning.
University. Yeah,
You all
yeah.
published terrible
I was like,
poems.
Jesus. But see, I had, what I'm saying is like, it was so like, the space I was in, you know, being at Howard, having already, you know, as I said, being bathed in the Black arts movement, having that all around me already. In fact, there was, you know, Ethelbert Miller at Howard, he would tell me, he said, you need to go live. Like, write, but what you most need, like, worthy of publication, don't worry, you
Right.
need to live.
Right.
Like, you need to go see the world, and
Right.
you know what I mean, and that sort of thing. So it was just a different space, you know, a good space, you know, but a privileged one.
Can I ask something about Baraka's early life? So when you first met him in the Village, this is still his beatnik phase, before he moved to Harlem, right? So he's married Hetty Cohen. He has a couple kids, and then he's transformed. Something happens, right? He moves to Harlem, but he dumps his family. He's done with beatniks. He's done with Cohens. Is that, should I be, I mean, I always found that very disturbing. Am I wrong to?
You'll know firsthand, but I like being familiar with that story. All I can imagine is this: you're always under this shadow of not being able to really claim your own identity and stand in your own feet under yourself and say, and it sounds like corny to say this now, but I'm Black, and it's okay that I'm Black, and all the people I know are Black, and my culture is Black, my music is Black, and that's what I do. And that, I mean, even in the 80s at the time, you know, was like, for me, like when I first encountered that from the Black, like it was revolutionary. I can't think about what it must have meant to have that revolution of consciousness in the 60s. You know, obviously there are individual people who, you know, might have been, you know, hurt, you know, individually, so I'm not, you know, making excuses for that, but I have to think that was a grand thing, you know, yeah.
I don't mean to, you know, it's not for me to judge his
No.
marriage. But to the thought of him leaving the wife and kids, that's a big deal. And it's hard not to find that a disturbing story. Were you aware of all that at the time?
Well, yeah, of course we were. You know, we were all very much involved with this, and that had to do. Baraka tells the story that he had gone to a book party in the Village with some friends, and the word came that Malcolm had been assassinated, and it just seemed like, where are we? What are we doing? You know, or what should we be doing right now? And one of the amazing things that he did, I don't know if some of you in the audience might know, is that he did move uptown to Harlem, and he also sent to all the artists a letter. I still have that letter in my papers, and the letter says, please come and help me continue Malcolm's work. You know, it was an amazing letter, and I remember when I read the letter, I cried. I cried, because the point is that, you know, we had all been blindsided there with the death of Malcolm and all the deaths that were coming along the way. And they bought a brownstone on 130th Street, and all the artists came out, began to come. And what we did is that I was assigned to write a proposal in order to get money to teach the children in the neighborhoods, like on Saturdays, go pick them up, open the door, throw your children out. We're going to teach them what they should know on a Saturday. I mean, that was, you know, very, very important. It was at that place, at that site, one Sunday afternoon, that Sister Abby Lincoln came with this amazingly short natural on her head, with her amazing beauty, and she taught 25 women, and the essay that she read was, "Who will revere the Black woman?" That happened there in that site. In that site with all the musicians, Sun Ra, everybody came in and they played. We read poetry. You know, that is what we did. But there were lines lined out around the corner, people, you know, on a Saturday night, because people, it was not a movie. It was not a dive you went to, you know, to hear anything, but you were coming to hear the jazz in the plays that Baraka did, you know, the blues in the plays that he did, and the avant-garde way of looking at ourselves in those plays and in that poetry. And we did that. And of course, it lasted 1 year. You know, some people who came from the Village with him up there began to to help wreck it. I tell the story sometimes to people who are doing some work that we were planning this work, to have the children come in, so we had to write proposals. And one day, we were up on the 3rd floor, and the Patterson brothers came in. They'd come from the village with Baraka. And they said, come on. They called us bougie bitches because we were educated, and we were going back to school to get more education. I'm serious. And they said, come downstairs. And we came to the 2nd floor, and they literally pulled out guns and put it on the table and says, now we're going to teach you really about revolution. And they lectured for about 3 hours, people. But I remember looking, and it's interesting the people you call up when you see something like that and you're frightened. And I remember my grandmother who said, someone can hit you once or scare you once. Someone can hit you twice or scare you twice. If they do it 3 times, it's on you. And I figured, I have one more time for them to do this. And they did it one more time, by the way. But when it was time for the 3rd time, we start meeting outside of that site at that point. I'm saying that there was not an easy thing that people were attempting to do. There were people who came with ulterior motives, to make sure it wouldn't happen. And all people were trying to do was to teach the community how to be self-sufficient, how to tell people this great art, this work will free many of us, make us at some point go and say, I don't belong in this slum house that you have me in. Because I did that work, I will then go in to a place and I would go and greet the landlord. I would tell people how to organize and hold their money back, right, from paying the rent until they fixed the toilets that had not flushed for 1 year. This is what we were about. This is what we were doing, my dear brother. Yeah.
We'll take just a minute. We'll be right back.
Did I make sense? Yeah.
Shenandoah, I long to see you away, you roll river. Shenandoah, I long to see you away. We're bound away across the wide Missouri. Shenandoah, I love your daughter away, you rolling river. For love he crossed the waters away. We're bound away across the wide Missouri. He loved the maiden away, you rolling river. With gifts his boat was laden. Away, we're bound away, across the wide Missouri. Shenandoah, I'll not deceive you away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I'm bound to lead you away. I'm bound away, across the wide Missouri. Bound away, across the wide Missouri.
It's just so full of yearning. So, where's your place?
The place is Howard University.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, Howard University. We won't try the 1, 2, 3 thing again. It's Howard University. I just want to add something really quick, if I could, to just that last part about Baraka. Probably the most directly influential person in my life, outside of my dad, was my first editor, David Carr. David, who passed away 2 years ago, was a recovering alcoholic, crack addict, beat his first wife, had done all sorts of horrible things, struggled with substance abuse and all sorts of things for most of his life. I mention that to say, I think, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I think we have to be careful about our expectations of people whose literature and whose work, and even whose actual, works out in the world we admire. Should I be so lucky one day, and have, the kind of literature that is, half of what, Sonia Sanchez has or Baraka has, and you have to strip me naked and look at all my choices, you will find a lot that is objectionable.
Exactly.
I assure you, you will. And I just, and this is especially important, I think, for those of us who are Black writers and who are students of American literature, because when you're Black, every other writer is a racist. And if we have to throw people out, for sins, or even if we have to pause, for long periods of time, our cupboards would be pretty bare. So I just think that's just really important in terms of our expectation.
Fair enough. And I think most people aren't good at anything. And to be a great writer is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. And to be an admirable person is equally rare. And to ask someone to be both, well, those people are just about non-existent. So I hope I didn't sound harsh.
No.
But I think it's worth at least asking those questions about the lives of writers we admire.
Sure.
All right. I think we brought them to silence. But no, I agree.
Okay.
So,
Howard.
Your place.
Yeah. Well, Howard's where it's very interesting because I dropped out of Howard University. I'm working on this book right now, the next book, and I have to talk about writing. It's a book for writers largely, and so much of all of any story, it always starts in failure. And so on the label, on the top, I was never a great student at Howard University, but I was a great student of Howard University. And it was just this, incredible You know, like not in the classroom, but you know, the university experience is about more than that. You know, it's about more than that.
It is.
And so, you know, it was this great, if you wanted to be like, if you were black and you wanted to be a writer, it was such the best place to be as a young person because, you know, Sonia Sanchez, Baraka, all these folks would just come. I mean, they would just come and they would visit and they would talk. And I remember I was sitting in a room one time and I was, you know, in fact, I was walking across the yard and somebody said, I see Davis is going to be here. I see Davis is just going to show up. You know, and I went into a little room down in the communication school and there might have been 20 of us there. Like listening to Ossie Davis, you know, and that wasn't out of any disrespect to Ossie Davis, but it was just the fact that, you know, people would just swing by. You know, Lucille Clifton might be there. You just never knew. There's a celebrity aspect when people talk about the homecomings and all of that, and that's fun, that's cool. But for the literary aspect, it was an incredible, incredible place to be.
What was it like to teach there?
I taught many years later there. I always wanted to teach at Howard, but Howard didn't really want us to teach there at all.
Wait, who's us?
Well, people, you know, like all of us, you know, Baraka, all the people who what they consider progressive, you know, and Baraka went there, mind you, because they didn't want us to teach there at all. They wanted other people that they considered safe. So I taught some years later. But what I did do is that I came down and I spoke. I did workshops for students a great deal, on Saturdays, actually. But the first time I went to Howard, it was a place where, as you say, people, you know, partied and saw a lot of good people and whatever. And I went down for this huge, I was engaged. I was 18 years of age and engaged. Because I went to Hunt at 16, and then at 18, I'm engaged. And my father's a would-be dentist, you know, or someone's going to be a dentist going to Howard. And so I went down. And let me tell you.
Wait, you were going to be a dentist?
No, my fiancé was a dentist. Who I was engaged
I thought, what a loss to dentistry and literature.
No.
And dental
well, that'd be something, you know, pulling teeth, right? You know? I mean, teaching lit sometimes, it's like pulling teeth, you know, whatever. But I'm just saying, I went down for that. And what I found out is that, indeed, I came out of Harlem. You know, we didn't have money. And I saw that bourgeois class there, and it threw me completely.
It's incredible.
The thing that really threw me is that my fiancé had a woman down there at Howard also, too. And she came up to me, you know, and literally almost cursed me out because she was so mad. And I was blindsided, you know, and I said, you know, very dramatically, you know, what is that? Who are you? What is this all about? Whatever. That was my first experience with Howard. But my second one was in 1968 to a great conference called Taboo, towards a black university, where they invited all of the people you could think about who were doing things in literature and in the world. And we ended up in the gymnasium honoring Sterling Brown, the great Sterling Brown there. And we went up in the middle. It's like a ring, we do battle. And people, I was the only female, you know, for years, I was the only female reading with those men. I mean, and someone said, well, wasn't the black guy sexist? I said, sexist? I said, you know, they didn't say, Sonia, you're the only female, you read first. You know, usually I was placed before Baraka, which was always interesting. It was like men, Sanchez, Baraka, whatever. And the place exploded. And years later, Sterling said to me, Brother Sterling said, you know, Sonia, that was a great night. I mean, people were stamping their feet. I mean, screaming. It was that kind of thing by the time we finished. He said, but you young people scared me half to death. He said, we had spent years showing America, and he meant white America, that we were professors just like them. We knew everything that they knew, but no, we were no problems to anyone. Then all of a sudden, your generation comes along and says, F you, America, you know, in a poem, whatever, et cetera. And they didn't know what to do with that. But he told me that years later.
Wasn't he kind of saying that in his poetry, though?
No, but he did. But he never cursed in his poetry.
Curse, right? He didn't curse.
You know,
he did, right,
but his was, in quotes, I mean, like the strong men getting stronger. Of course, you know, they don't come by one, but they come by tens, whatever. But he said, we took it a step further. And as a consequence, he said, all these young people stamping their feet, almost wrecking the gym, that we were saying simply to America, like, you know, we don't really care whether you like us or not, you know, whatever. We're going to say this about this country. We're talking about change. We're talking about we are just as good as you are, you know, period. And Presby brought something else into that lit, but he always did too with that folkloric thing. He brought the blues into his, but we brought the blues and we brought something called jazz in it.
Right.
And we said, do that, do 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 the fuck you, that do 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 fuck you, you know, and that's. And he said it scared him half to death. And the great Arthur P. Davis, who was there with him, wrote an essay about the young black poets. And he said, we were these terrible young people, you know, going around talking about not liking, you know, white America. But there is such a point of people changing. I will come to Howard to give this lecture for some big series. The place was packed, and I saw, you know, the brother down there, you know, and I said, that's Professor Davis. And when I finished, he stood up and says, my name is Dr. Arthur P. Davis, and I have taught at Howard for 40 years, and I was literally sliding down in my chair. And he said, but you know, I want you to know that Professor Sanchez and her group of poets were right. I came off that stage, went in front of him, hugged him, and every time I came down to D.C., he took me out to lunch, I took him out to lunch, you know, and we talked to each other, and we were, I mean, this is about change, if you understand, because he understood, he said, I understand what they were doing, and they had to do what they did, just as we had to do what we did. Isn't it an amazing story?
It is amazing,
Yeah.
because I think it's the most precious and rare sentence in the English language. You were right and I was wrong. Because how often does anyone ever say that to anyone about anything?
Yeah. But because he was saying, no, you do. I mean, if you're a professor, you do. I mean, if you're a good professor, you say, hey, hold it, people. You know, like, I'm coming back in with something else that's quite different, you know. And especially the great thing about students, I mean, having these great students that they will make you go beyond what you have settled in. And that's what teaching is so great, because you get with students and you say, I really need to think about that for a minute, you know. And you come back in, and there you are. So that's the joy of teaching. And that's what this great scholar stood up in front of thousands of people and said, I was wrong, they were right, and it is an honor to be with her and I hope to have her call me friend. I ran off that stage. I wanted to jump the stage, you know. Well, I used to jump stages. I don't do it anymore, you know. But I ran, and I hugged him, you know, and I held him, and you know, when he was dying, you know, I went into that hospital room, and it was cold in there, and I said to them, where are the blankets? Keep him warm. I started to rub his feet, and I rubbed his feet and his legs all the way up to his body, you know, and I asked to have something to wipe my hands, and I rubbed his head, I rubbed his face, and I whispered, I said, I love you. Thank you for being the scholar before us that would embrace us and say simply, we understand what you're trying to do. That was Arthur P. Davis, the great Arthur P. Davis. Yes.
Amazing. Ta-Nehisi, when Sonia first mentioned encountering the bourgeoisie at school, you made a face.
Oh, I didn't know black people had money like that.
Neither did I.
I had never seen anything like that.
Woo.
I mean, it was like people that own their own, like kids had cars.
Yeah.
Like they own cars, and you know, and they would be like, I'm fourth generation.
I know.
Like fourth, really? Like that's a thing? Like that actually happened? I mean, it was my first, and there's beauty in this. There's actually beauty in this, because I talk about in the book, like it was the first place where I really got to see how diverse,
Right.
diasporically, you know, class-wise, everything, like the black community really
Don't forget the color now.
was. And the color, yeah, no, that's part of it. That really is part of it. I mean, I had never, and the sororities and the frats with their traditions, which
right.
that just wasn't my tradition. But it was a black tradition, right? Like I couldn't go tell them they wasn't black. Like I couldn't do that. You know, I mean, they, you know, it was and that was the interesting thing, about, Sonia saying about how they would like they didn't want, folks like you to teach there because they were, I could totally see that. I could tell, even loving Howard as much as I do, certainly in the 60s, I could it's a university that, we're all full of contradictions, that, is deeply dependent on the government largesse, and making that, grant work the way it is. And so there are things that we love, absolutely adore about the Mecca. And then there are things that just make us want to, bang our heads against the wall,
Right.
Right, right. If it weren't complicated, it wouldn't be worth thinking about.
Yeah.
I especially like the part in Between the World and Me when you write about Howard. Would you read a little of that?
Sure, yes.
Right.
If I can take your copy, yes. Sure, yes.
I took the liberty of marking it, but you can just throw that post. You can throw that post-it away and read anything you want.
Okay. All right, so you want
Not a stupid choice, though, right?
You want the first? No, it's not a stupid choice.
Thank you. Right, not the best choice.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So I'm gonna do this, and
No,
I'm gonna
not
do this
pushing.
paragraph. No, we're okay. I was admitted to Howard University, but formed and shaped by the Mecca. These institutions are related, but not the same. This is me making an excuse for my performance. Jesus. These institutions are related, but not the same. Howard University is an institution of higher education concerned with the LSAT, Magna Cum Laude, and Phi Beta Kappa. The Mecca is a machine crafted to capture and concentrate the dark energy of all African people and inject it directly into the student body. The Mecca derives its power from the heritage of Howard University, which in Jim Crow days enjoyed a near monopoly on black talent. And whereas most other historically black schools were scattered like forts in the great wilderness of the old Confederacy, Howard was in Washington, D.C., Chocolate City, and thus in proximity to both federal power and black power. The result was an alumni and professorate that spanned genre and generation. Charles Drew, Amiri Baraka, Thurgood Marshall, I.C. Davis, Doug Wilder, David Dinkins, Lucille Clifton, Toni Morrison, Kwame Ture. The history, the location, the alumni combined to create the Mecca, the crossroads of the black diaspora. I first witnessed this power out on the yard, that communal green space in the center of the campus where the students gathered, and I saw everything I knew of my black self multiplied out into seemingly endless variations. There were the scions of Nigerian aristocrats in their business suits, giving dap to bald-headed Qs in purple windbreakers and tan Tims. There were the high yellow progeny of AME preachers debating the clerics of Asur Set. There were California girls turned Muslim, born anew in hijab and long skirt. There were Ponzi schemers and Christian cultists, tabernacle fanatics and mathematical genius. It was like listening to 100 different renditions of Redemption Song, each in a different color and key.
We'll take a moment. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. Jericho, Jericho, Just at the Battle of Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down. Just at the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Just at the Battle of Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down. Set the people alive, battles in my hand. Got the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Got the Battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Got the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Got the Battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Shouting, wolves come tumbling down. Got the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Got the Battle of Jericho, and wolves come tumbling down. Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down. Got to the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Got to the Battle of Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down. Sing with me. Jericho, Jericho, just at the Battle of Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down again. Just at the Battle of Jericho, 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 just at the Battle of Jericho, when the walls come tumbling down, and the walls come tumbling down, and the walls come tumbling down.
Ebony Hillbillies. I should let you know that we'll edit a version of this for broadcast, and that'll air at the end of March. The next show we're doing is Gish Jet. She's very good, right? Mm-hmm. You like her? Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the Museum of Chinese in America. After that, it's Anthony Appia. Very cool. Mm-hmm. He took my job, but that's a whole other story, and we can talk about that another time at my house later when I'm crying. How will you possibly keep track of all this stuff? I mean, it's a lot to ask of anyone. If only there were some way someone would email you and just let you know. Well, fortunately, I have a clipboard, and I'm willing to use it. If you want to get just an update about when we're doing another live show or when the stuff's going to broadcast, just give us your email. And we want something you won't get any porn. Unless you want that. In which case, we will be next year. So, what's your thing?
What was my thing?
The book.
Black Fire.
Yes.
But I wanted to say, hand me your book, Tom.
I mean, we can do this too.
Right. On the back of that book is amazing words from Sister Toni Morrison about this young man in this book. And yesterday was Toni Morrison's birthday.
Oh.
So we should all give a big clap. Yeah. Great, 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 great writer.
All right.
And so my book, the book that we both chose, was something called, this is original Black Fire, people. This is what it looked like. And on the back, Larry Neal and Baraka. Can you see them? Right. There they are, some young Larry Neal and some young Baraka there. This is Black Fire. And we were talking about, we had to choose the same thing, the same place, the same person.
But it's great, right? Because then you get to talk.
Oh, well, not only is it
you
great.
You love this format.
Well, great minds run well together, I think, And,
Wasn't hard.
Yeah, it wasn't that hard. But this book is a seminal book of what was going on in the minds of young people and young writers and young cultural workers in a place called America. And this is indeed the result of this book. This man by the name of Baraka, sent out letters to people, saying simply also, we're doing an anthology of Baraka and Larry, Leroy Jones and Larry Neal, and will you send us some poetry? And they chose 4 of my poems, and I mean, all the great poets are in there. The great playwrights are in there also, too, people who were writing at that particular time. But this book caused a great disturbance in America because, as the poets would say, we don't care whether you like what we're saying at all, but what we are saying simply, it needs to be said, for the sanity, of black folks in this place called America, that this is what is happening. And, one of the things I did when I was teaching in academia, when I went in to teach poetry, you didn't have anthologies with black folks in it. And I started to write the editors, saying, you need to include some black writers in, at least someone like Gwendolyn Brooks. I mean, evidently that everyone seems to love Sister Gwendolyn Brooks, right? And Margaret Walker. And I even took to calling. Well, about 5 years ago, when the last conference was held in Philadelphia, the one that happens in December of all the teachers. Huh?
Was it a solid? It wasn't a solid.
No, it wasn't a solid, no. But it's the one with all the teachers that they have. I'm blanking on what it was. And I look at books, and my mind was saying, do not buy a book. You have enough books in your house, And I'm looking at a book, and all of a sudden there was a tap on my shoulder. And I turned around, and he said, I'm Doctor. But I said, oh, hi, how you doing? He turned to his wife and said, this is Professor Sanchez. She wrote me for 2 years. And I did, by the way. I wrote him for 2 years saying, I will not buy your anthology until you include some black writers in this anthology. This is what you have to do. I called him on the telephone, too. And when he heard my voice, his voice dropped. I said, hi, how you doing? I'm still not using your anthology. And he turned to his wife with a big smile. And this is what I say to people, but people can change. You can talk about people if you want to, but people can change. He said, honey, I have included black writers, herself included, in the anthologies that we do now. And that is, if you see that happening, you're a professor, you have to push people to make them understand. That means you call them almost every week or at least every month, and to demand that. And he did that.
Did he really call you honey?
No, he turned to his wife and said, honey, Professor Sanchez used to call me weekly or at least monthly and insist that I include. And 2 years later of listening to me and getting letters from me, he actually included blacks. And you do have to push. And then I began to say, you have to do Latinos too. And Asian writers. I mean, this is what we did. You're not just in academia just pushing for yourself, but you're pushing also for the great literature of people who also live and reside in this place called America. Yeah.
Ta-Nehisi, you're saying...
40 years later, that was the first book. 40 years later, people, it took 40 years to get another book on the black arts. This is it. It's an amazing book. And what do we do? The editors, Professor Bracey, James Smethurst, and myself. And this book is a big book, and it includes the poetry and the plays and the essays, the introductions, from people. But it includes the musicians also, too, and all of the great work that went on and all the great art that went on. And we also included people like Max Roach writing about his music. This is important thing. So this is 40 years later. It took us that long to get another book on the black arts.
Well, you were saying that book was in your house when you were growing up. You were aware of that.
Yeah, it was. And I don't know. My house, it was just so different. I mean, because there was so many, like, I would not have marked it as a particularly significant book because there was so many, like, books like that, black this, black that, all over the house. But it only turned out, later, like, when I got to Howard and I would, go sit in Moreland Spingarn and I would pull these anthologies and books, and I said, I know that book. You know what I mean?
Right, I saw it.
And again, like, just to, go back to where we started, for me, what was so significant about that was, somebody saying you have the right to speak out of your own experience. That's it. As they used to call it, a black aesthetic. Like you had a right to your own aesthetic, your life, your systems, your symbology, the things that you see around you. And it was interesting because at the time, at that point, this would have been the early 90s, hip hop was in a specific place where it had gone into this deeply, very lyrical, almost literary thing. And I could like match up what I would hear these rappers doing with like the kind of, sort of theorizing and the art that actually was in the book, like Black Fire. And I thought, that's how I want to write. That's how I want to write. That's what I want. I've been trying to do that Between Well and Me, largely it's like the continuous attempt. Every time to try to write about the world in a way that only you can see. I just published this, this is how far this influence goes for me. I just published this piece in the Atlantic on the president, and the lead of the piece is I go to this big party that they have at the White House, and they invite all these black singers and black entertainers.
Not
rappers.
the black arts people though.
It wasn't no poetry that night. And no jazz. But they had a bunch of folks there, right? And like when I thought about how to write about it, like it was like I can't. Jesus, there's no other way to say this. Like, I have to write this in my own voice. I have to write this as a black person seeing this, which does not mean I stand up and say, hey, I'm a black person seeing this. Right. It's just like when you say, like when you have a joke in the first paragraph and you say something like brown bag test, I'm not going to explain it. No,
it kills it to explain.
Yeah, I'm not going to explain it. And I don't have to explain it, and I can, reference that, and I can keep going. It's okay. It's all right. And so to have that feeling, which I have to say is, not something that folks always have, that you don't have to explain yourself, that you can just write right through it, that your experiences, your symbols, the things around you, your culture is just as valid as anybody else. Because when I'm reading, folks about, during that period, if I was reading something by a certain author before the internet and I didn't understand something, they didn't explain it. White folks didn't explain it. You had to figure it out. And that was our lives. And so for me, like what that book was saying was, it's okay if they have to figure it out too. That's all right. You know what I mean? So that was a huge aesthetic influence on me.
Is this as much a sense of who the reader is as who the writer is?
Yeah. I guess you're thinking you're writing for black folks. And I guess a lot, like what I think is when I write, I think like there's an ideal place in my head, and that is a beautiful place that I'm trying to get to in the literature. And that place is shaped by all of my experiences, and being a black person here, it's very hard for that not to thus be a black place, and not have, the rhythms and the music and the references that, have been around me, all my, like when I went to write that piece, I had like a playlist of just Marvin Gaye. It was all I listened to the whole time I was writing. That was all, and that was like the spirit that I wanted to, pull up, and it's always sort of like that, it's,
But that's true. But you know what else happens when you teach, and you'll be teaching soon, is that when you start from this black experience, we went from black arts to the black studies, and we go in and we began to teach, from this emphasis of the black writing that we're doing. The FBI would come to my house and say, you're teaching Richard Wright and all these people, and I was shocked by that, right? But you're teaching this. But you're not just teaching black students. There are Asian students looking at you in San Francisco, whatever, et cetera. And I will walk into that classroom, someone will hand me and say, Sonia, I think you should look at this now. This is in the 1960s, people. We think this has to do with concentration camps. And it was the sign that told the Japanese to report, whatever. And I had 2 Japanese-American students, and I held it up and said, I think this has to do with concentration camps. Well, they got pissed at me. When you teach sometimes and say something like that, they're going to say, I don't know anything about that, Professor Sanchez. And I was in my classes, my hands joined, they dropped, and I had to grab their hands. No, I'm serious about this. I said, but as they left, I said, take it with you and ask your parents. When they came back to class on Tuesday morning, they had tears in their eyes. Their parents told them about having to report, in 1 week for a camp, concentration camp. That's amazing. And they had to sell their property and take a great loss, whatever. They didn't know that. They were so embarrassed by the Japanese that they kept it quiet, you see. So one of the things when you teach and you write from this great black experience, that's why people read you, because they know that experience is also their experience with some varying degrees of differences along the way. That is a human experience. Right. And that's what we were trying to say here. Hey, people, we call it black, but by golly, we know it's human. And you finally got to realize that this is a human experience, just like your experience also, too. And that is real. That's not make-believe at all. Yeah.
Sonia, would you read one of the poems that was in the first?
The first one on the Black Fire?
Fire?
Yeah. If not, I was going to.
That's a great point, too. I mean, it's like you get to the general by going to the specific,
exactly.
as they say.
Because all this stuff comes out of this. I mean, so Black studies, all of a sudden, the next semester we had, Asian studies. Right. We had Jewish studies, women's studies. All that came out of that experience. We broke the groundwork, for it. And there we were. And this is America. This is what we did. And if I can find that poem, it'd be very helpful. I always think I know where stuff is in a book, It's like, and all of a sudden you realize you don't know crap. Maybe I'll go in the front and see exactly. In the poetry section.
No pressure.
No pressure. No, I just don't. I realize I have not touched this book in years,
I printed it out.
Here it is.
Oh, okay.
I'll read a poem called Summary. Okay?
Sure.
Oh, you want me to read poem at 30?
No, I want you to read whatever you want to read.
Yeah. Well, I do like poem at 30 too, It is poem at 30. It is midnight. No magical, bewitching hour for me. I know only that I am here waiting, remembering that once as a child I walked 2 miles in my sleep. Did I know then where I was going, traveling? I am always traveling. I want to tell you about me, about nights on a brown couch when I wrap my bones in lint and refuse to move. No one touches me anymore. Father, do not send me out among strangers. You, black man, stretching, scraping the mold from your body. Here is my hand. I am not afraid of the night. That's a poem that I wrote, a poem at 30.
We'll take some questions, if that's okay?
Sure.
Before we do, join me in thanking the Ebony Hillbillies and especially Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sonia Sanchez. There are people circulating with microphones. There's a person. There's another person. I see a person in the back, and I like to keep the questions as widely scattered as possible so they get a brisk aerobic workout.
Am I going first? How you doing? This question is for Ta-Nehisi. I was wondering, you said you left Howard. What happens then? Like, you go to the Mecca, and then there's that moment when you leave. And I had friends who left Morehouse and left Howard, and your family looks at you, and there's this pause, there's this moment like, yeah, So what was that like for you?
I mean, that's what happened. Well, two things happened. I left, and then, I had a son about a year later. So it was like, I was like, and the whole time I was at Howard, I was in and out of Howard. I don't think I was ever at Howard for more than 2 years. So I was there the first semester. I was kind of around I was always around Howard. The question was I in class? Was I actually registered? You know what I mean? Things was a little more loose back then. If you had your ID, you could get access to certain things, but you just might not get grades. I was in that situation quite a bit, And then when I was 20, I started my career as a journalist at that point, and that was the moment. Because before I had actually wanted to be a poet. I was writing poetry before that, Then I realized how hard poetry was, just completely unforgiving as an art form. And so when I turned to journalism, that was the first moment where I could see, like, I guess what you would call a career path, like the possibility of someone actually giving me money for writing. Just something I hadn't seen before. And at that point...
I like poetry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's true, though. It's sad, but true. But at that point, like, I don't know. I mean, I think I had not been good at a lot of things as a young person. And this was the first place where someone was like, you're not bad at this. You don't completely suck at this. And so I thought, well, this is all I have. I mean, this is generally about all I can do out of, the group of, sort of professions that my parents had in mind for me. And what happens after that? You run up credit card bills. You had a worst credit in the world for long periods of time. You have issues with the IRS. You have, conversations with your landlord that are not pleasant at all. You end up delivering food out in Brooklyn somewhere. And you find out that's actually a great job. It was a great, great job. You do, what you, have to do. You know what I mean? To take care of what you got to take care of. And I think, like, one of the great problems, and I'm sorry about this for young writers, there are a lot of movies that depict writing in this kind of romantic way, and it's not at all. I mean, I always listen, if you can do something else, you should do something else. But if you can't, you might be a writer. That's how so I didn't really feel like I had much choice in the matter. And one of the things I've had to adjust to, frankly, over the past couple of years is the presence of this book, because it altered a lot of what I, considered, my life as a writer to be. Mm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just because it came up several times in the conversation with the story about the letter that you got from Baraka, and then you talking about having a voice or an aesthetic that you're developing or confronting. I'm just wondering, this year, since the third week of January, have either of you felt like a new sense of your place as a writer that's been new or more urgent, or is it like, this is what I do, I'm going to stay the course?
I feel like the latter, like this is what I do.
Yeah. Well, I'm 82 years of age, and it's obvious this is what I do. Yeah, and not only is it what you do, I always listen to those questions they ask you, my dear brother, and the thing that I know about you, from remembering you for a little boy, you were always an observer, and you were always quiet. And these are the people when they're quiet, they're always watching you and listening to what people are doing. So, in your first book, you could hear that. I mean, you had guiding all that information. All that time, people thought you were just sitting there. You were absorbing and listening. And that is what that writer does. That writer listens. That listens, and either you keep a journal or you listen, you keep it in your head and you pull on it. So this is what you do. I used to say, and I'll say this again because you're going into teaching now, but I used to say, I just wish I had someone who could take care of me so I could just write. That's all I want to do is just write, But let me tell you something, my dear brother. When you have family, and I mean family, in terms of, there's always someone in the family who takes care of everybody, fathers, mothers, sisters, whatever, et cetera. And so you have to have a job, you work as a consequence. You know, and that is what I did. And I used to say, I just wish I could just write. But the teaching part, you know, got mixed up with the writing, and the teaching always makes you much more human. You know, it always begins to, at some point, redirect you, you know. Like, you know, I'm not a revisionist, so I would be on the stage and people would make terrible comments about someone who was gay. So everybody on stage laughed, but I'm on stage with a bunch of people. I go, ah. And one day I just looked up and said, that's not funny.
Yeah.
You know, my brother's gay. That is far from being funny, you know, whatever, et cetera. So I didn't laugh. I just sat there. But when I got up to speak, someone said, oh, Professor Sanchez, I see you didn't think that was funny. And I said, no, because it wasn't funny at all. You know, and I began to say, do you realize these are some of my students you're talking about? These are some of my family members you're talking about, you know, period. And so therefore, I'm saying this teaching thing makes you very human. You know, it makes you begin to truly understand at some point that the writing is important, but at some point you might need to redirect what you're doing at some point, or reconsider, you know, some of the things that you have written or some of the thoughts you've thought. But yeah, I think we're born writers, to be frank, you know. I'm told at 4 I was writing little ditties, you know, whatever, in the house, these little poems, dun 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 dun. But I also was a stutterer, which meant that I didn't talk a great deal, and I also was a listener. You know, and found in Mama, my grandmother said to the aunts in the house, someone teach this girl how to read. She's bothered me about reading. You know, I don't read good. You know what I mean? But the thing that I listened to in that house was the language of my grandmother. That Black English, don't ever say it's dialect. It is not dialect. It is Black English. That Black English that she spoke, whatever. And it always traveled with me, that sound that she gave, that sound, which was a Christian sound. But I always say when she used to talk about her experience, it was a blues sound. And also when she even went a bit further, you know, when the aunties who were younger began to talk, there was a jazz sound. So there was music in that house. I was always hearing the music, and I always heard her humming. You know, when things got tough, she hummed. You know, and I find myself when things get tough for me sometimes, I go around the house humming. When I'm in some place and it's bad stuff I'm listening to, I start humming. Listen, you'll hear my humming. Block it out. You know, it's not what it should be. So yeah, this is what you do. This thing that we are born to do, and sometimes we fight it for a long time. But teaching also is an interesting part of the writing. That teaching also makes you, at some point, look up. Just look up. You know, sometimes we write with the head down, but the teaching makes you look up and see the people you really are directing some of this information to, and you finally smile and you understand, hey, this is a great love affair I have with students and with the written word also too. Yeah.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the organizers for having this intergenerational conversation. It's great. Just to follow up with what you said about the teaching making you more human, what are your thoughts about the role of the writer? Does the writer have a social responsibility? And how would you, what are your thoughts on how what happened in the Black arts movement connects to the Black Lives Matter movement?
Oh, Jesus.
See, that's a professor asking.
I know, that's a serious question.
It is a serious question.
So let me try to make the link here. Well, let me address the first part of that question. I live in this, or I try to live in this interesting space of oftentimes the people I'm most in sympathy with, I keep a little distance from as a writer.
Why? I'm sorry, but I have to.
No, that's a great question, because I think it comes up over and over and over again. So I wrote, like, just to make this concrete, and I'm answering your question, but to make it concrete, I wrote a piece arguing for reparations, and then I got invitations from a lot of reparations activists to actually speak.
Gotcha.
I said I didn't want to. And it wasn't because I disagreed with it. It wasn't like beef. It wasn't like I don't, I'm not with you. But I worry, I guess, I want the right to change my mind. I don't want to be tied in that sort of way. I think a lot of times, like when you're in activism, you have to say things and you have to talk to people in a way that as a writer, maybe that's not, like when you don't have to move people, you're freer to say things. There are things that I say in between the world and me that if I were trying to rally people to do something, I might not say. And so I just, like, I feel like the roles are a little different. Even as I maintain, you know, obviously great respect, you know, for activists and specifically for Black Lives Matter movement right now. In terms of the link, I think one of the things that is there for me is, you know, you were talking over and over again about this ability to just be like, fuck you, whatever. You know, we don't, and I was thinking about how much I hear that now, you know, from folks. And even this debate about respectability, politics, and all, this notion that I have to somehow shrink my humanity in order to get basic things that were promised to me in the first place. So to get these people to stop shooting me in the street, to stop smacking me over the top of my head, you know, with nightsticks or, you know, doing whatever, I have to present myself in this kind of cloistered way so as not to offend. And you guys were like, man, we ain't doing that. Right. We're not doing that. We're gonna be who we're gonna be. It says a piece in the Times today, and it's about race and it's not about race, but it's totally about race. The piece is about how are liberals helping Trump? Because liberals are making...
I hated that piece.
Yeah, well...
Right.
I'll be a little more diplomatic. But it ties in though, right?
No,
because
it's complete crap.
Yeah, it kind of it was. Okay, it was. You said it, and I agreed with it.
Thank you.
I agreed with it. But, you know, the theory of it was basically that people who object to a guy bragging about sexual assault, people who object to a guy who called for, you know, the Central Park joggers to actually be executed, that they should shrink themselves. He shouldn't have to shrink himself. They should have to shrink themselves. And one of the things about that piece is I don't think there was an explicit mention of race all through that piece. Yeah. Like, not all, but it was there. It was all in it. Even it was what was not being said. It was what was the unsaid, the ignored piece of that. And, you know, I think like just this, and the Black Lives Matter folks are very, very much on this. They're like, we're not going to shrink. Like, we will not, you know, act in such a way to make ourselves presentable when you are shooting people down in the streets of Chicago and then lying about it, and there's a cover-up that goes all the way up to the mayor. You can't then, you know, tell us to pull our pants up. You can't, you know, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I think that comes, you know, directly out of the Black Arts Movement, the Black Power movement. I think that's a direct inheritance of that.
Hello. Just curious, in your perspective when it comes to contemporary works. I know you mentioned before that you were told that the generation prior to yours was a little bit, maybe not afraid, but uncomfortable with the way you were being a little bit so militant and about the words you were saying. How do you feel about today's works in the arts? Do you feel like people who consider themselves to be more bloggers nowadays than writers?
More
More bloggers online than there are writers?
what? Bloggers? What?
Bloggers online. How do you... Yeah, how would you feel about that? Almost answered the question.
So wait, can I just clarify one thing? In order for us to get this together, and I love this is not a slight. Sister Sonia does not use email.
Okay.
So you just need to understand, like, and I actually think she's kind of right about that. Like, I think that's a good thing. I think it shrinks your life down to important things.
I do, and I do have an email, but I am very selective about
That is
you know,
incredible.
what I do. I'm serious.
Smart. No,
Because
that's smart.
many years ago, I sat down with all this whatever. When I was teaching, I had a secretary who did that for me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I was retired, and I had all the stuff.
All the
So
stuff.
one day, I sat down from about 8 o'clock, and I looked up. It was 2 p.m.
That
in the
can happen.
afternoon.
That can happen.
And I said, "Are you serious?"
Yeah.
And I then asked, "Show me how to erase this." Whatever. I said to my son, "You have got to show me how to erase this." And then I give it out to people, like you, whatever, people I know. And it comes in, and I don't mind. But the joke about that is that everyone knows when I get an email, I will call you. You know,
That's right.
I hate
That's
to
right.
use that because you don't know how the person feels.
That's right.
You don't know what
That's
they're
right.
thinking, but you listen. And so one day I had to send Baraka an email, and the telephone rang. He said, "Oh, I can't believe that this old person actually sent me an email. It's true, I don't send emails out, but it was the only way to get to him. His line was busy, whatever. So I emailed him, whatever, etc. And that is what you do. My dear brother, I don't know the question that you ask anymore, after all this.
Sorry, I diverted. That was my fault.
But there, I guess you're asking, how do I feel about the people who are writing today? Is that, yeah. There are some amazing young people writing today, just as Black Lives Matter is amazing, whatever, for what it's doing at this particular point, right? And there are a number of young, and most of them the ones I have taught, which is an amazing thing, the ones getting these awards. I told them that I was going to send them a letter about SRF, Sanchez Retirement Fund. For them to send $1 a week. I mean, I taught 40 years, people, So if each one sends $1 a week, can you imagine? For the first time in my life, I can just write without having to go out on the road. But there's some great, amazing, and one of the things I used to say to my students when they came in is that because I'm an activist doesn't mean you have to be one. I never insisted that you had to think like me. What I did insist that you do is that you had to learn, that you had to do the best work you could do in my class, period. That's all. But I would give you all that information. And I think that it's important to understand that maybe some of the people have observed my life and said it's a hard life when you're an activist. But I started to teach in Black Studies, and what did I do? I will leave a place called New York City, right? I would leave the Schomburg and Miss Hudson, who had sent me to Mr. Michaud and Mr. Richard Moore, who had given me all these books that I should have had. Seriously, So when I get to start Black Studies, what will happen? We would then not Xerox, we would Mimeo. We Mimeoed the book Came. The whole book came. We Mimeoed, Du Bois. I mean, all these books that we did, and because they weren't in print at all. And one Wednesday, my landlord would come and knock on my door and say, Professor Sanchez, there's some men here who want to see you. And the guy came in and said, FBI. And I said, oh, I lived in Haight-Ashbury. And so, there was always something going on around. So I said, oh, people acting up. Is that well? He said, no, you're teaching, we say Du Bois. He said, Du Bois, Wright, Garvey, all these, and I said, I was so naive, I said, oh yes, you can't teach Black Studies without them. And the guy went, duh, whatever. And what I'm saying is we taught these people because they were viable people, We had to teach Langston Hughes, but what we didn't know, these are the people, not blackballed, these people were whiteballed by America, okay? That you were not to touch them. They were not to be touched at all. But we were these new people, new kids on the block. We didn't know that. And so therefore, he turned to my landlord and said, put her out. She's one of those militants on the college campus. And there I was, in a place called San Francisco, had been there 1 year. And I'm thinking about Miss Hudson was the one who gave me all those books. Mr. Richard Moore gave me these books, All these people gave me these books. And finally, this man literally said, we're going to get you. It was just like violent, it was like really unbelievable. And I'm standing there. But my Japanese-American landlord had given me a Samoyed. It's a beautiful dog. I come from New York City. We could barely feed ourselves, but that's a dog. And I said I would keep that dog maybe for about 2 weeks to say that I had tried, to keep this dog, right? And what did I do? That moment, that the last scream that the man directed towards me, I heard these big feet come down the hallway, and it was Snow, the dog. And he sat right down next to me. And I looked at Snow and I said, well, what is the dog doing here? Whatever. And the guy put his hand in my face and said, we are going to get you and all those militants on that campus. And Snow leaped for him. And I looked at that, and he said, lady, call your dog. And I said, Snow. But as Snow sat down, I had a different appreciation for that dog. Like, wow. And I found finally said to them, I don't know what you're talking about. And I opened the door and they left. And I petted that dog for the first time. And I said, we were vegetarians. And I said, I'm going to go out and buy you a steak because, you deserve a steak. But I called Miss Hudson at the Schaumburg, and I was in tears. I said, Miss Hudson, I can still hear myself crying. Said, Miss Hudson, the FBI just left my house, and all I am doing is teaching black literature. She said, oh, my dear, I thought if you taught some of those writers, you might get in a little trouble. But I am forever grateful for those two men who came to my house, because I have been taught to teach literature, in terms of, the ideas that were running rampant in there, like blah, blah, blah. But I began to teach literature, the sociology of black literature, the economics of black literature. I changed the whole way I taught literature, and I'm grateful for them because I truly began to teach literature the way it should have been taught. Yeah.
But mostly I like that you became friends with the dog.
Oh,
And that's why I
beautiful
like to
dog.
always end the show with a dog-human reconciliation. That's it. So join me once again in thanking Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sonia Sanchez.
Wasn't that amazing? Yeah, I mean, amazing story about that.